I will just wait a minute or so and let anyone who is join, and then we'll begin. Okay, so let's get started. So welcome everyone. This is the March AMA with the delivery team. So delivery team are responsible. We are deploying GitLab.com and releasing our monthly releases and our patch releases and security releases out to our self-managed users. So we have a few questions in here already. Let me just see. So first one is Toshitaka. I'm not sure if he's on the call. So, no, I will verbalize. So first question is, I want to understand how to track the delivery and deployment for GitLab.com generally. So there's a few sub-questions here. So on the first one, where can I see the deployment job / pipeline for this release with a tag mentioned here? The pipeline listed there only has a check stage without any deployment jobs. So Myra, over to you.
Yep, thank you for the question. So the pipelines for the deployment itself can be found in the deployer repo. But if you want to know where the EMR has been deployed to, like where is the status of the EMR, if it has been deployed to staging, canary, or production, there are several ways to do that. The first one is to execute the chatops command on Slack. So you execute that chatops command, you grab the merge request SHA, and it is going to say to you like, oh, okay, this merge request has been deployed to staging, to canary, or to production, depending. The other one is to take a look at the environment section on the MR widget. So that part is updated every time the MR is deployed to an environment. And to also follow the announcement channel for the updates about the packages that are being updated, well, deployed to.
Thank you. Cool. And then the second part of this question is the pipelines in GitLab project only execute delivery / package jobs without any deployment jobs, correct?
That is correct. Pipelines on the GitLab projects do not trigger any deployments. They are mostly related to the GitLab project. They execute tests, lints, Q&A, etc., etc. The deployments to GitLab.com are mostly, well, not mostly, are handled by the deployer repository and by our tooling that is called the release tools.
And is there a reason we have it set that way?
Is there a reason we have it set that way? That is a good question. I'm not sure. I guess so. Perhaps someone in the delivery team can help me answer that.
I can try taking this, Myra.
Okay, thanks.
So, this, well, there are historical reasons, obviously, around this. So we started with yet another project. It was Takeoff. It was basically changing stuff in Chef server. So many pieces going around. But the most important bit here is that we often refer at GitLab as GitLab as a single application, but we have several repositories. So we use some terms in delivery team like projects, satellite projects, and packagers. So in release tools, we try to synchronize all those things. So satellite projects are workers, GitLab shell, Gisli, everything that is not in GitLab repo. Then we have GitLab repo, which is GitLab. And then we have packagers like Helm charts, CNG images, actually, and Omnibus. So this is why we have these external things. We try to keep all those things together, and yeah, also serving our special needs, like going toward continuous delivery, but still having a monthly release from our customer. So I think this is the reason.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Cool. So then part C of this question is, how does GitLab Release Tools bot change the workflow label in MRs to workflow / production after changes are deployed to production? And Myra.
Yep. So I think the short answer is magic. The long answer is that after each deployment, whether it's to staging, canary, or production, we have a dedicated job that goes and gets the MRs that are contained in a package and updates those accordingly. So whenever we have a deployment to staging, a job is triggered, the job goes and fetches the merge request and update each of them. And the same thing happens for canary and production. So I pointed out, I think I pointed out the code, probably not, but I can link to the code if someone is curious about it.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm going to just add on here a comment, which is that's the reason actually. So I know sometimes there's been questions about why the label is added at like a slightly different time to actually when the code lands on the server. And it's because it's a job as part of our pipeline. So depending on the length of our pipeline, it can land, actually, depending if we had some very long post-deployment migrations, it's possible the label actually gets applied a bit of time later. So it's just another stage in the pipeline. Fantastic. Thank you very much for adding those questions. Next up, Arturo, thank you for adding your question. Would you like to verbalize?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the Ask Me Anything. So my question is similar to the classic question, like what happens when you type a URL in your browser. So in this case, is what happens when you deploy when we deploy GitLab to production. And yeah, I know I like how works like different things, but I like to have like a high level picture, you know, of this. Thank you.
Sure. I'll take this one as I wrote a lot of stuff here in the agenda. So thank you for the question. This is a really good one. So I will start from high level as you asked and try to give some insight in other things that may be relevant for someone working on features or code changes. So first of all, before we can touch production, there's staging. And at the end of the staging deployment, we run QA tests, which is we call them the smoke tests. And if this is not green, we cannot promote build. Then production start, and production in infrastructure terminology is made by two stages, canary and main stage. So canary stage is basically what we call canary, and main stage is what we usually refer as production, but is just a subset of it. So as long as QA tests on staging are green, we can start canary deployment without any, just automatically. We don't have to any manual operation. More or less goes like this. So we run regular migration, then we upgrade the canary GitLab fleet in batches. Then the rest of the canary fleet is updated. Then we track the successful canary deployment. I mean, this is kind of in reverse. We run QA and then we track the canary successful deployment. So up until here, everything is automated since the starting of a staging deployment pipeline. So it goes all in one way unless something blocks us. Then we have 1 hour baking time, which means that we wait for 1 hour with canary deployed, but the main production stage, we're running the old version. And we use this to figuring out if there are some error not catched by our QA tests. At the end of this baking time, we run some health checks, and then release managers can promote the build to production. It's a manual job. When we promote it, same health check is run again, and then it starts again by GitLab fleet still in batches, rest of the fleet by service in batches, post-deployment migrations, and then we finally track a successful deployment. Now, this is more or less what we do, and as a micro review of it, but I think it's important also looking at this from the database point of view. So I made this little picture here. Maybe it's better if I can share my screen just for a second, so it will be also on the recording. It will be easier to. So here it is. So this is a picture that I made for our rollback epic. So basically, if we look at a deployment from the point of view of because it's a distributed system, so there are multiple machines, multiple services involved. So if we look at the database point of view, we are running on a schema A in this example. And then at a certain point, we start the canary deployment, which is this, it's behind this green bars here. So, and canary, at a certain point in canary deployment, we run regular migrations, and the schema changes from schema A to schema B. And then some machines, not all of them, moves from the old version to the new one. So here we see machine A that goes from version N to version N+1. This stops the canary deployment. And then we go into the main stage. Main stage is when the rest of the fleet is updated as well. And finally, we run the post-deployment migration. So there's this two synchronization points, which are regular migration and post-deployment migration, which are very far away in time. We're talking about 2-4 hours, if we are unlucky, even 6. And this is where things may go wrong, because we have multiple versions of the same application running at the same time, and there's a intermediate schema in there because it's just regular migration, but not post-deployment migration. So this is where we live as a delivery team. Instead of living in schema A and schema C, this is where, say, the fun is, right? So things can go wrong and things can break. And yeah, there's an extra point I wanted to make, but I didn't have time to type it. There's also the micro level, which is important for people working on, say, workers or things like that. So what happens in a single machine within a deployment? Because also in there, things doesn't happen just with a flipping a switch, right? So you have old version of workers, old version of code, then you change GitLab code, workers code as well, and then you restart things. So there could be a point in time where you have a new workers in the same machine and an old Puma version, and then everything aligns. So that's the point, right? So what is interesting here is what happens when version mismatches. And this always happens during a deployment. So it's something to pay attention to. I think I spoke even too much, so.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any follow-up questions, Arturo, on that one?
I think I understand very well like how it works with different stages, like a canary stage in production. That maybe we haven't talked about, for example, how we deploy the things. Like, for example, we are running Kubernetes, or what are the cloud environment that we are like deploying the different things. Maybe we can go a little bit more about that.
Sure. So GitLab is always on VM. So we're talking about virtual machines running omnibus packages. When we talk about the rest of the fleet, this is a mixed state. So Sidekick is almost entirely, I think, running on Kubernetes, and API web pages are running on VMs. So we are moving services. The Git frontend is running on Kubernetes now. So when I say that we are upgrading the rest of the fleet, basically we have several jobs, and depending on the service, they either run an Ansible script which just SSH into every single machine and upgrade packages and restart packages and things like reconfigure and restart, or they trigger what we call Kate's workload pipeline, which is a project that we have for handling Kubernetes workload. So in that case, we change the images in the configuration and we trigger a Helm upgrade that will just do a rollout of the new version. So we are in a hybrid state.
And just to add a little detail to that, so yeah, we're very much kind of our other side of our world, in addition to deployments and releases, is migrating GitLab.com over to Kubernetes. So we will hopefully reach a point where everything is on Kubernetes. We're not fully there yet, so that kind of adds some complexity here. Well, thank you so much for your questions. Anoop, would you like to verbalize?
Yes, thank you for hosting these. These are really fun and informative, so I appreciate it. What are the things that this team does that should really, from your perspective, from this team's perspective, be just part of GitLab as a product, so that our users and customers, and I guess your team as well, can just use it off the shelf?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Fits very well with our sort of strategy. So we are moving, like, kind of historical reasons, an awful lot. Most of our work is outside the product, definitely not ideal. And we've been sort of moving towards that. It's definitely a strategy for us to continue moving into the product. And I'd love to get kind of everyone in delivery's thoughts on their sort of wish list. I think two big ones that sit for top of my sort of list. One is handling of the additional, of the multiple repos. That's just a big piece of complexity that makes it quite difficult for us to necessarily just adopt features that do exist already in GitLab. I know it's a fairly unusual use case, but certainly it's one that certainly adds complexity to our day-to-day. And then the second one I have, which is considerably smaller, and actually something I was chatting to Orit in releases this morning, so we're going to see if we can collaborate on this, is just making it easy to actually keep track of all the pieces of information. So for all the steps that Alessio just went through before on how we do deployments, each one of those actually has quite a lot of information associated, like times, diffs, package IDs, and all of these things. And we struggle really to know how to quickly find all those within delivery team. Like, there are times where in an incident situation, we need to quite quickly understand, like, what changed on this server and when did it change and what might have caused a problem. And at the moment, we don't really have a quick place to jump to where we can quickly find all that information. So some sort of deployment report, we were talking about user readable deployment report that would give us that information would be super. I'm curious about the rest of the delivery team. What's your feature wish list look like?
We have also the multi-project triggering pipeline. So we do extensive use of triggers for, because it's a multi-project thing, right? So we trigger pipelines from one project to the other one. And since we moved to Ops instance, almost everything we use is in that instance. So we finally can use multi-project pipeline, but we made extensive use of waiting for a pipeline to be just as a gating action. So we trigger something, we need this to be completed, and then we can move on. And so far we ended up using active waiting. So we have an extra job that just wait for the one to finish, because yeah, there are a bunch of issues in our multi-project pipeline. So if something goes wrong, and usually goes wrong in our pipeline, because we can have flaky QA or things like that, there's no way to retry or to just continue for where it breaks.
So I will say the different ways of handling releases, like the monthly releases, the patch releases, the security releases. We have even a different setup for one of them, that is the security releases. We need to have like a different private project. And also for different releases, we need to know what merge requests were included in the type of release, whether it's a patch release or a monthly release. It will be great to just have a single feature that could do all of that for us.
Nice.
Thank you.
Maybe it is but yeah, so very much we have a strategy to move 4 of our workflows inside the product this year. And so we will be working with the stage groups to, hopefully there are features already existing that we can just pick up. There may be some that are close that with a small sort of addition or extension, then we can also pick those up. Or other ones we'll be trying to add into backlogs. So yeah, very excited. Great, thanks so much for asking and also for writing up the notes. Very good of you. Greg, would you like to verbalize?
Sure, yeah, and as I'm writing this, I think it's probably better suited for the quality team, but I'll ask it here anyways. Do we have any QA processes in place for testing self-managed omnibus or upgrade paths that skip minor or patch versions? I know the upgrade process between self-managed and .com, as well as the deployment environment for self-managed versus .com, there can be some differences. Do we have any QA or testing for the self-managed specific stuff?
Do you want me to take this, Amy?
Yeah, if you know the answer,
Okay.
that would be great.
So I think that I know the answer, but I agree that probably, yeah, it's better suited for quality. So what I can tell you,
I'll give you a shot, and what I'll do is I'll make sure quality also know you've asked so they can follow up. So.
Okay, so from our point of view, we have dedicated environment for testing customer releases. And I'm quite sure we test omnibus packages. So we have the release environment where every time we tag something, we deploy it there. Well, every time between quotes. So when we do security fixes, backports for security fixes, they don't end up there. So we always deploy the latest patch release. So that machine runs QA as well. And so we test every single patch releases installation. But this doesn't answer your question because we don't skip any minor or any patch release there. We just install everything.
And it's just the previous monthly to the next monthly, right? I don't think we even put the patch releases on there, do we?
We do.
Oh, we do? Okay.
No,
okay.
When we do backports, we don't, because it will be a rollback. But when we do the latest patch release is always deployed there.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we test the nicest upgrade path, but yeah, no jumping. But I will add in and make sure quality come back because they might have some good thoughts about like how this ties in with the quality strategy and why we go about it that way. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. One thing I did want to just, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to please drop them in on the agenda. Like one thing I would like to kind of ask, slightly staged, is, but I know it's a little bit perhaps not as visible as it should be and will be coming along, is Yurik has been working on leading on kind of moving changelogs inside the GitLab product, and we've been sort of testing and rolling those things out. But Yurik, do you want to give us a little bit of a sort of overview of that work and kind of what the next steps look like for that?
Yeah, sure. So the sort of elevator pitch of it is that we have our current changelog approach, which involves contributors and other engineers committing a YAML file. And in there, they write a short description of what the feature, for example, is about. And then they have to link to the merge request. And optionally, if it's a contributor, I believe they can also add the author name to it. And then there's a tag saying, hey, this is a bug fix, a feature being added, etc. That particular workflow we've been using for a couple of years, but it has some issues. One of them, for example, being that you have this sort of two-step process of make your changes, add the file, and then set up your merge request. But then you have to go back, edit the file to add the merge request, force push. And for experienced engineers, that is, at least for me, at least mildly annoying, but doable. But for people that are new to Git, for example, or that use the web IDE, this is simply not even an option. The web IDE doesn't let you force push, I believe. And even if it did, they might not know what it means. So we've been working on trying to come up with a solution for that, and specifically a solution built in GitLab, because the system that we currently use is custom made. It's not something you can install yourself and easily use. The setup that we're now moving to is using this newly introduced feature. It's introduced in 13.9. And essentially the way it works is you write your commit messages as you normally would, and then you add a certain tag at the end of the message. And that tag will indicate is this a feature, a bug, etc. And from that point on, GitLab takes care of everything. So it will try to automatically figure out the merge request. It will show the author. All these normally manual steps are done for you, along with some sort of added power features where you can customize how it's presented and stuff like that. We are currently testing that out with GitLab Pages and Omnibus. GitLab Pages, I believe, earlier today decided they were going to do their next release with this. Basically, if that goes well, that will be their sort of a new way of doing it. Omnibus, we're basically waiting until the 22nd. The idea being that we do this release with the new approach, but they've been using both old and new approach in parallel, so we can always revert if, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. And then we'll sort of gradually start rolling that out to the other satellite projects. And then last, we will do the main Rails application. We're doing that one last because it has the largest number of contributors with a fairly diverse set of experiences. So a lot of people, they might be highly experienced, but also a lot of people who probably don't even know what Git is, for example. Yeah, so that's what we're working on. It's instead of a custom thing, it's all built in GitLab through an API. Let's see, what else is there? Yeah, I think that's sort of the brief overview of it. And this is part of the sort of dogfooding effort we've been focusing on in the last couple of months. And this was related to one of the previous questions. One of the things where we felt like, hey, this should really be in the product. Because at least for free software projects, they basically all need to generate a changelog. And there's different ways of doing it, but it would be much easier if there's just one way of doing it, at least when you use GitLab.
Nice. Thanks very much. So we are pretty much at time. Has anyone got any final question? Or if not, there's also, we have a Slack channel, which people are also always welcome to drop in and chat to us there as well. So fantastic. Well, thank you so much for everyone who turned up, and thank you so much for all the great questions as well. Really good to see you all. Enjoy the rest of your days. Bye.